Tonight, there are signs that the proverbial bloom is coming off the rose when it comes to our nation's rosy economic forecast post the Trump tax cut. The tax cuts were described as a sort of miracle grow that would boost the U.S. economy for years and years to come. And it did just that, to be fair, for one good year. But now, as predicted by many economists, its effect may actually be taking our economy in a completely different direction. 5 reasons that this is actually taking place, and I want to take you through them one by one so that you can, plan ahead and understand how this might affect you. Economics professor Richard Wolff, he teaches economics, in fact, at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's good enough to join us now. Professor, thanks for being with us as usual.
Glad to be here despite the burning of Notre Dame.
Something to look, isn't that amazing to look at something like that?
Yes,
I mean, the
it is.
historical effect, it's really quite remarkable. Some would say that we're kind of burning through our economic exigence here in this country. I'm going to take you through the 4 or 5 major points, Professor. The first one is U.S. corporations' tax rates were cut from 35% to 21%, cutting our nation's quarterly tax collections from $264 billion to $149 billion. So in other words, if you're a household or you're running a business, you've got less money coming in. I guess the problem with that, you tell me, you're the expert, is that if you take in less money, you're not going to be able to pay down your debts and your deficit, right?
That's right. For the boost to our economy for a year in which Mr. Trump and the Republicans were desperately trying to become a bit more popular than they were, for that, and they got that gain for a year, they were willing to virtually bankrupt the United States government, to deprive it of tens of billions of dollars, forcing the government either to cut back on the programs we all rely on, or, if it wasn't going to do that, to borrow. You have the spectacle of the conservative or so-called conservative Republicans who used to rail against deficit spending, in fact, cutting the taxes, increasing government spending, and therefore ballooning the deficit back to over $1 trillion. Amazing spectacle to watch.
Here's the second point. GDP growth, Professor, goes from 2.9%. At the time that we got the boost from the tax cut, everybody was celebrating, oh my God, look, our GDP is growing, we're producing more, which is always a good thing, but now it's already down to 2.1%. What's going on?
Well, it's a sugar high. It lasts for a little while, and then it fades out. Most of that money that didn't have to be paid in taxes was used by corporations to buy back their stock on the stock market, boosting the price of the stocks, giving their CEOs big pay packages, merging and acquiring one another. These are very good things for the 5% at the top, but for everybody else, they mean more layoffs, more mergers that don't mean so many people. And so you see very quickly the fading of the economic growth it was supposed to create, necessitating God knows what next steps as people realize that they were taken for a ride. The corporations got a tremendous tax cut, but the rest of us got very little in exchange.
Well, let's put a number on that, because it's interesting you went there, because that's not my next point. Here we go. I'm going to give you the exact number that's now being reported on this. If you make $500,000 to $1 million a year, right, you were at least able to make 5 to 6% more. In other words, at the very least, you made 5 to 6% more in your total earnings, salary, your standard of life. If you make $50,000 or less, you actually only increased your situation by 0.6% more. Explain.
Yes, it's unbelievable. It makes me sometimes so angry, I lose the ability to be articulate. Here's what you've done. You've given an enormous gift to the richest people amongst us, the ones who need it least. and you've gotten rid of the protest that should have and could have come from the mass of people by giving them a little bit of something. It's the rich people at the table glomming all the good food and throwing some crumbs to the rest of us so we keep quiet. It's a sad day for the country, even if it's a politically clever move for those who push that kind of a tax cut through.
But I can hear the people who are watching us right now who are saying to themselves, well, hold on, Professor, I'm a fiscal conservative, and I actually believe that if you incentivize the rich, they will hire more people who need the jobs. Give it to the rich and it'll trickle down. Are they wrong?
Well, they're wrong. They're wrong over and over again. Look, the simple reality, which they can understand too, is if you give it to the rich, it's up to the rich to then decide what happens. And if the rich decide to let some trickle down, oh, okay, we'll get some. But if the rich decide not to have it trickle down, we won't. And here's what happened over the last year. They took the gift from the government in reduced taxes, and they boosted the stock market through stock buybacks. They bought each other out in big conglomerations, and they invested abroad. For the rest of us, no trickle down, because they didn't feel like it. That's not the way to run an economy democratically for the majority.
Economics Professor Richard Wolff, as usual, we thank you for that explanation. You're always a fantastic guest. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rick. Glad to be here.
I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.